I've gotten a lot of reports from students who took the LSAT today all saying the same thing, that logical reasoning felt different. Not just harder or more stressful, but different in how it demanded attention. And the way that people are describing it matters. They're not saying the questions were confusing. They're saying the logic was harder to keep organized, that the arguments felt denser and relationships stacked up more often. And several questions felt like mini logic games hiding inside ordinary paragraphs. And so when that kind of feedback shows up independently and repeatedly, it's not a coincidence. It's indicating that the emphasis of this section has shifted. And so today, I'm going to break down exactly what that shift looks like inside logical reasoning, why it showed up so clearly on today's LSAT, and how to train yourself so it stops being a liability if you're taking the LSAT in the next few months or beyond. Now, what changed in logical reasoning is not that the LSAT suddenly introduced new question types. You're still seeing the same old types: necessary assumption, flaw, inference, strengthen, weaken, parallel, principle, method of reasoning, and so on. But what did change is how much logical structure you are expected to manage at once. Earlier versions of logical reasoning over the past few decades would often present one central move or one key assumption or one gap that you could isolate quickly. But today's LSAT leaned more towards arguments where you had multiple elements interacting with each other, overlapping conditions, conclusions that depended on more than one relationship being tracked correctly. So you could understand each sentence in isolation, but still lose track of the argument as a whole. And that creates a different kind of difficulty that taxes your working memory that goes beyond the limits of normal working memory. And the reason this shift is happening is because of the removal of the logic games section, starting with the August 2024 LSAT. Back when you had logic games on the test, you would have conditional chains, interacting rules, constrained hypotheticals, and system level thinking. Now, when LSAC was forced to remove the logic games section due to a lawsuit, those skills did not just disappear from the LSAT entirely. LSAC shifted the focus of the LSAT to incorporate those concepts into the logical reasoning section instead. So in other words, LSAC has moved formal logic into logical reasoning by embedding it inside arguments instead of isolating it inside a more diagramming friendly section. And so today's LSAT is yet another clear confirmation that this is a deliberate move. So these aren't necessarily just feeling like harder questions. They feel like you've got to hold more information in your head before committing to a choice. And you might feel unsure even when the argument seems reasonable. Now, let's break down the main trap families or the main question types that are driving this experience. Many questions on today's LSAT included conditional logic that was layered rather than isolated. So you had a conditional paired with an exception, or necessary conditions hidden behind phrases like requires or depends upon, or conditionals that apply to subgroups, not the entire argument. And the danger here is not misunderstanding the language, it's treating one condition as if it controls the entire argument. And so your response to facing this has got to be procedural and rules driven rather than intuitive, meaning that you've got to have a step-by-step approach because these are going to break the limits of what you can handle or hold in your head all at once. And so you got to know whether the conditionals are creating a chain or a fork or a bottleneck. And you don't want to take the contrapositive for every single statement because you just aren't going to have time for that. Now, you've also got to look for more subtle logical gaps, the kind of arguments with gaps that are easy to overlook. And so you might have conclusions that quietly expand the scope of what you're dealing with, or claims about improvement or decline without a fixed baseline, or evaluations without a defined standard. Or they might want you to generalize based on a sample that is just too narrow or unrepresentative. And so the trap here is choosing an answer that feels relevant but does not repair the exact weakness. And so to avoid this, you've got to reduce every argument to three parts. First, what the evidence establishes. Two, what the conclusion claims. And three, what must be true in order for the leap to work. And if you can't state the missing link precisely, the choices are going to feel interchangeable. Now, the third question type you want to look for is quantitative logic that is disguised as common sense. Now, numbers and percentages played a larger role on today's LSAT than in the past, but the math itself isn't difficult and it's not really anything new. You're looking at percentage changes without stable denominators, or raw totals presented without population context, or rates that shift because the group changed, or averages that move due to composition, not performance. And so LSAC is relying on speed here. And students assume that numbers are objective and they rush beyond what they should. And so the correct approach here is to interrogate the structure of the argument and the scope of what you're dealing with. So is this percentage, is it a raw number, or is it a rate of change? And what is the denominator, or what is the size of the group? Is that group consistent over time? Or does the conclusion exceed what the data supports? Now, this shift in the LSAT over the past couple of years is going to penalize students who rely on familiarity, and it's going to reward those who rely on structure. Recognizing a question type is no longer enough, and understanding the words themselves is also no longer enough. The LSAT now rewards your discipline in evaluating formal logic, your ability to track relationships, your resistance to intuitive shortcuts, and your ability to stay precise under time pressure. That's why today's LSAT felt so different. And so if you're taking the LSAT soon, you've got to adjust your preparation, and your priorities matter. First, you've got to be able to interpret formal logic automatically. You've got to be able to translate conditionals quickly and recognize when interactions exist. Second, your ability to spot assumptions has to be precise. You want to practice articulating and pre-phrasing the exact gap in the argument before getting into the answer choices. And your ability to interpret quantity-related logic, you've got to train that deliberately. You've got to treat numbers as arguments, not calculations. And know that these questions have appeared on the LSAT ever since the beginning of the LSAT, or at least the modern format starting in June 1991. They're just appearing with increased prevalence on the modern LSAT now, ever since the removal of the logic game section. So there's plenty of these to study from the previous exams. And you've got to know how to execute under timed conditions. So know when to skip, when to avoid getting bogged down or stuck, because you don't want to let one dense question consume the entire section and waste your time. So it's all about how you reallocate your attention given the changes to the LSAT. Now, your review process is key. Every time you review, you should extract a key rule or insight that you can apply to your studying in the future. So instead of saying, I should have read more carefully, you want takeaways like, I treated a necessary condition as a sufficient condition, I ignored a scope shift, I assumed a percentage change reflected raw totals, or I addressed the premise instead of the gap. And then for every question you missed, every question you were uncertain of, you've got to write down the conclusion, the evidence, the precise gap, the kind of trap that you fell for, and the course correction going forward. That's how you turn your experiences into pattern recognition. Now, today's LSAT really shouldn't have been unpredictable because although it was structured differently from many of the released LSAT exams, these changes have been on the LSAT for the past year and a half or more, going on more and more over time, more focus on numbers and percentages, more focus on quantitative reasoning, conditional logic. And so students who keep preparing the old way using outdated textbooks and courses are going to get surprised again and again. But students who adapt using modern, up-to-date materials, getting live support for the latest LSAT changes, are going to find this version of the LSAT actually more controllable rather than less. And your ability to control your prep, to take charge of your prep, is going to be what produces high scores. And if you'd like my help getting the highest possible score whenever you're taking the LSAT, whether it's in April, June, August, or beyond, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons, private one-on-one over Zoom video for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram. That is an open offer for everybody watching this now or later. I'm happy to meet with you personally, help you craft your plan of attack, help you get some support, set the direction of your studying so that you can get from your current LSAT score to your goal score on your time frame personally, help you knock it out once and for all. Now, I see a lot of questions coming into the chat here. I will get to as many of those as I can. Keep them coming, folks. If I haven't gotten to your question yet, just feel free to drop it in again, and I'll try to get to it if I think I can give some useful context, give you some good advice to get you from your current score to your goal score whenever you're taking it. So feel free to book that call with me. I'm just putting the link here in the chat again. I see some questions here around chances and goal scores and all of that. I mean, for any given law school, what you want to do is you want to look at what are their LSAT medians, what are their GPA medians, and how do you stack up relative to those. So I see Go Allen is asking, I've got a 169 LSAT, a 3.0 GPA. Where do I apply? Well, there's 200 American Bar Association approved law schools, and you'd probably get into a lot of them, but I'm assuming that you're not willing to live in any one of the 50 states and go to any one of those law schools at any price, right? So I would instead say, which law schools appeal to you first? So narrow the scope of your focus. Can you make a short list out of those 200 schools? Can you narrow it down to maybe 30 or 40 that you're interested in? And then out of those schools, see, okay, which ones are your numbers just subpar, not strong enough? Which one are you kind of on target for? And which ones are you a shoo-in for? And if you're below both the LSAT and the GPA medians, it might be unlikely. If you're above one median but below the other, maybe you've got a shot. And if you're above both, you're probably pretty competitive. So I would start there. Now know that because there is rampant grade inflation, a 3.0 GPA is unfortunately below the medians of a lot of law schools. A 169 LSAT is pretty strong though. And so you're going to be a so-called splitter applicant, great LSAT score, relatively lower GPA. Depending on the schools you're targeting, you might want to get your LSAT score even higher to offset a lower GPA. The higher your LSAT is, the more scholarship money you can get, the better the law schools you can get into. So crunch the numbers. You can go on LSAC's calculator and you'll see where you stack up at various law schools, which ones you're above, which ones you're on par, which ones you're below. And a good rule for them might be you apply to 6 or 7 reach schools, 6 or 7 target schools, and then 6 or 7 safety schools. You cast a wide net. You see what comes back. I see Phaedra's asking, how long should I be spending on a logical reasoning question if I'm just starting out? Well, when you're just starting off with your prep, you want to start off with untimed work first, just to get your accuracy up. Give yourself a chance to learn the arguments. I mean, there's maybe 15, 17 different logical reasoning question types, depending on how you count them. And you've got to give yourself a chance to interpret and analyze and deconstruct the arguments first before you introduce timing. And so I wouldn't really set any hard time constraint at all when you're just starting off. When you're doing untimed means literally untimed. And so spending 20 or 30 minutes just working through the particulars of a single question might not be a bad idea. Then you shorten it over time. Once you're at, say, 80% accuracy, you could then start doing some timed sections and see where you're at. And of course, on test day, you're going to have roughly 35 minutes per section. Assuming standard timing, it'll be 35 minutes to solve roughly 26 questions. But if you wanted to reduce it little by little, you could start off with, say, 55 minutes per section, then 52, then 49, then 46, then 43, and count down until you get to 35 roughly. It can be a gradual process, and the way in which you reduce that time depends on how long you have till your test date. If you're taking the LSAT in 2 months, you've got to accelerate the shortening process because you're racing against the clock. Your LSAT's coming up. If you're taking it in August and you got 6 months, you can take a more slow and steady approach. So I would agree with Gogalin's approach here of, she says, when you're just starting out, don't put any time constraints on yourself, aim for accuracy. So I would agree with that advice. Accuracy first, then you introduce pacing, then you introduce endurance. And so over a 2-month or say a 9-week time frame, you could devote 3 weeks to an accuracy focus, 3 weeks to pacing, 3 weeks to endurance, If you've got more like 6 months, you could devote 2 months to accuracy, 2 months to pacing, and 2 months to endurance. That would be fine as well. Just look at your test date and then divide it up accordingly. And of course, I'm not saying that you should wait until the last month or two to introduce full exams. You should incorporate those earlier, but I'm saying as a primary focus. Now, I see a question here around what to use for updated materials. So the best source of practice tests is going to be LSAC's Law Hub platform for official LSAT practice tests. But then, of course, most of those do not include explanations, and there's no one you could talk to or get feedback from. And so for that reason, at LSAT Unplugged, we try to fill in that gap by giving you more support. We give you private one-on-one coaching. We have small group semi-private coaching sessions. We have on-demand video courses. We make custom study plans. And of course, everything that we offer is updated for the modern LSAT format in 2026 and beyond. And so, for example, we removed everything logic games after they removed logic games from the test a year and a half ago. We added a lot more on logical reasoning since then, since it's now 2/3 of the test. We also added more material on reading comprehension around the recent change in January, where they cut the dual passages for some test takers. We're also beefing up the writing sample materials currently. I've been working a lot on that lately because LSAC will probably start scoring the writing sample in the next year or two. So we're constantly trying to stay ahead of what LSAC is doing so that when they actually announce that change, you'll already be able to jump right in and pick up where you need to get prepared for your new LSAT. I see Sauce is asking, how do I, as a newcomer, differentiate the basic strategy of test taking away from the rest? I'm trying to interpret this question. Can you elaborate a little bit? I'm not totally sure of the meaning of the question. So when you're just starting off, you've got to focus on accuracy, like I said, then pacing, then endurance. And so accuracy means you're giving yourself the time to learn the strategies for the different sections and the different question types. And there's over a dozen different types of logical reasoning questions. And so you want to know step by step, how are you going to approach strengthen, weaken, flaw, necessary assumption, sufficient assumption, parallel, resolve the paradox, and so on. You learn the strategy step by step, untimed. Then you start working on pacing, doing individual timed sections so that you can translate the strategies into a timed context, giving yourself a little bit of that pressure that you're going to have on test day. Can you solve a question in average of roughly 1 minute and 24 seconds? Of course, pacing means that you're allocating time as well based on the difficulty level of the questions. And so in logical reasoning, the questions are in a general order of difficulty, meaning they get tougher as the section goes on. So you want to solve the first 10 questions in roughly 10 minutes. You build up a time bank that you can then apply to the tougher questions later in the section. Then with endurance, you're doing full-length timed practice tests. But every phase of your study plan has a given emphasis or approach based on what you've got to be doing at that stage of your prep. And if you want to talk through what a personal study plan could look like for your prep, you can book the free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Links in my bio on TikTok and Instagram, below the video on YouTube, and we could talk through what your study plan could look like to give you that solid foundation in the different strategies. I see Brina's asking that she tried booking a meeting with me. Not sure if I got it. Well, if you got a confirmation in your email, if you got a text confirmation or reminder, then you're good and you'll be on my calendar. If you didn't get any confirmation on your end, then maybe your email wasn't correct or there was a typo in your phone number. Just double check that, make sure it went through. And you could email me or text me to ask, and the team and I will be able to confirm that for you. Chelsea's asking, do you know when the writing sample will likely be graded? Probably either starting in the second half of this year or the second half of 2027. LSAC typically introduces their formal changes to the LSAT starting in July or August of a given calendar year. So LSAC testing years run from July to June of the following year, like financial years. And so we're going to have a testing year going from July 2026 to June 2027. For any change they're going to introduce starting in July, they'll probably announce it in February or March. And so if they are going to score the writing sample this year, they'll probably announce it sometime in the next month or so. I've been checking LSAC's site daily, waiting for the writing sample change. And if they're not going to do it this year, then they'll probably do it next year. And the reason I think this is because they made a blog post on their site about a year ago saying that they are exploring scoring the writing sample, but they wouldn't be doing it for the current testing year. But they never said anything about the following testing year. And they also recently added a writing ability score field to the official LSAT score reports. Currently, that field is empty, but they don't just go around adding fields to score reports for no reason, right? It's an anticipation of something. And so they're updating their system to get ready for that change. And as for when they're going to actually make the change, it's anybody's guess, but it'll probably be this year or next year. And as soon as I know, I'll update all of you, and then we'll go live with all the writing sample changes that we have coming. And they'll probably introduce rubrics and such, giving us a sense of what will go into scoring the writing sample, what they're looking for in good responses. But even once the writing sample is scored, my guess is that it will still be a lot less important than the multiple choice portions of the LSAT, just given historical trends. So you're going to want to focus on logical reasoning and reading comprehension first and foremost. And until they're scoring the writing sample, I would not devote much attention to the writing portion in particular, but also don't treat it like a joke. The core says, I'm taking it Saturday and I'm so scared. If I fail, if I take it again, can I apply for spring 2027 or is that not feasible? Well, good luck taking the LSAT tomorrow. Hope you rock it. As you mentioned, know that you can always retake it if it doesn't go your way. Law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take into consideration the highest score on your record, which means that there's really no downside to retaking. And for peace of mind, you might want to sign up for the April test or the June LSAT just as a backup, even if you're not planning on taking it, so that you know that while the LSAT as a whole is incredibly important, no one particular test date is going to make or break you because you have the option to retake. So trust in your prep up to this point. If you've studied, if you've given it your all, if you're feeling like you have that strong foundation, then go in with the mindset that you're going to rock the LSAT because you put in the work. And if you don't feel like you put in the work, then know that you have a retake ahead of you and treat this like a dry run, knowing that it'll be a chance for you to get familiar or get some exposure with the actual official test taking experience, the system check, the proctor, the nerves of taking it for real, but also knowing in the back of your mind that this is not the end all be all. And if you want some support preparing for that retake whenever you're taking it April, June, or beyond, then you can always book the free tutoring with me. Typically, I recommend that you go into an official LSAT with your practice test average being a couple points higher than your goal score, because students typically drop a couple of points from the practice to the official. And so you want to have that buffer in place. And so if you want to score a 170 on your official, you want your practice tests going in to be a 173, 175 at least, because students often drop a few points due to nerves and anxiety, a bad proctor, tech issues, and what have you. And so you want to go in a little bit above just to have that safety net. And if you want help getting that score up, of course, you could book the tutoring with me. Now, as for rates and the breakdowns for our services, we always like to customize the program for the individual student. Our programs are not really a one-size-fits-all like a Kaplan or a Princeton or whatnot. We try to personalize every program because students need different levels of support based on the score increase they're looking for and the time frame you're looking to achieve that increase over. So in other words, a student who wants to improve 5 points in 2 weeks is going to need a very different kind of program than a student who wants to improve 20 points in 3 months. And so we adjust the level of support that we're giving you to your time frame and to your goals. And so every program is personalized. I like to meet with every student personally to make sure the program is going to be a good fit for them. And so if you want to talk through with me what your options could look like, you could book the free tutoring lesson with me. The link's in my bio. I see Braden's asking, do you believe that LSAC is trying to intentionally make logical reasoning harder? Maybe trying to incorporate parts of logic games into logical reasoning. So yes and yes. I think they're trying to make logical reasoning harder in part by making it more unpredictable. And they're also trying to counter the LSAT score inflation. For those who are not aware, LSAT score medians are rising. The average student is getting higher LSAT scores in part due to prepping more, prepping better, the online LSAT being easier in some ways versus taking it in person on paper at a testing center, the fact that the LSAT is shorter now than it used to be, the fact that people are retaking more and only the highest score counts, the fact that accommodations are rising as well, more people are getting extra time. So all of those factors are making folks get higher scores, and in a way that's kind of watering down the legitimacy of the LSAT to some extent. And so LSAC is countering that in part by making the LSAT more unpredictable. Now, LSAC also wants to maintain the integrity of the LSAT, and they are sticklers or for the particulars of the test. They really want to maintain the LSAT testing certain specific concepts. And LSAC, as you can imagine, wasn't too happy when they had to remove logic games due to having to settle that lawsuit with the blind test takers and remove logic games. And so they found a backdoor or a loophole to test those same concepts in the logical reasoning portion, the conditional reasoning, the formal logic, the conditional chains, the numbers and percentages. And so they incorporated more of the quantitative reasoning into logical reasoning instead, since they could no longer do that in the logic game section, since there is no more logic game section. So this is not accidental, of course. You see a clear increased emphasis on and increased prevalence of these concepts in logical reasoning over the past couple of years. And so you have the ability to study those concepts, of course. They've been on the LSAT for the past 35 years or so, going back to June 1991. You just got to dig through the old exams to find them. And so one thing we've been doing for our students over the past couple of years is giving our students drill sets and recommendations of particular concepts to focus on in those old logical reasoning questions. We build those into your study plan for you. And so I see Phaedra's asking, will learning logic games help with logical reasoning now? I wouldn't go so far as to study logic games specifically because they're no longer on the test. And that'd be going overboard and might actually be counterproductive because you're studying a section that literally is no longer on the LSAT. Your time would be better spent focusing on more logical reasoning than you might otherwise would have. And specifically, of course, 2/3 of your prep should be logical reasoning on average, because logical reasoning is 2/3 of the scored portions of the LSAT. But you should also increase the relative percentage of formal logic and conditional reasoning that you study out of the logical reasoning section. I know it's a little bit roundabout. I hope I'm being clear about that. The idea here is that your typical logical reasoning section from an older LSAT had a relatively lower percentage of formal logic questions and conditional reasoning questions than you will see in a logical reasoning section in 2026 and beyond. So what you want to do is you want to slightly increase the percentage of formal logic questions that you do out of logical reasoning sections. So what we do for our students is we give you lists of questions to work on that are real official logical reasoning questions from those old exams, but we give you a little bit of a boost in your focus on those types of questions because they've shown up with increased prevalence ever since LSAC removed the logic game section a year and a half ago. So that's where I would adjust the relative percentage of your prep time. So I hope that clears it up. Feel free to ask follow-ups on that. And if anybody wants to talk through how that affects their preparation and wants some support crafting a study plan with more focus on these types of logical reasoning questions, you can, of course, book the free LSAT tutoring with me. And we could talk through it more. And there's plenty of videos on my YouTube channel covering this as well. If you just click the link in my bio and dig into the YouTube channel, LSAT Unplugged, you'll see it there. I see a question here. Should we work on level 1 question types before moving on to higher levels, or should we mix it up? So if you're just starting off with your prep, I'm always going to recommend starting easier and going harder. Build a strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types. Start easy, build your momentum, build up your morale, and then get into the harder questions as time goes on. Build a strong foundation. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time burning through material that you're going to get wrong. And we don't want you to do that. We want you to feel confident and get stronger and stronger over time. I see DJ's asking, I have a one-on-one today, but I haven't gotten a Zoom invite. When can I expect it? So if you haven't gotten a Zoom invite for your call, just email the team and we can help you get things squared away. Or if you have your coach's email or their phone number, you can just call or text them directly and they'll be able to get you squared away. Also check out your spam folder in case anything went there, DJ. Now, one factor that we haven't talked about lately is the fact that aside from the LSAT changing, law school admissions is also changing. And there's this coming demographic cliff that's going to affect the ease with which you're going to be able to get into law school. In other words, it's going to get easier to get into law school over the next couple of years. And so I want you to imagine a world where law schools needed you more than you needed them. And I know that sounds backwards because for years, the admissions process has trained you to feel small because law schools have the rankings, the prestige, the leverage, and you're supposed to feel grateful just to get waitlisted. But there's something big changing quietly, structurally, and almost completely under the radar. And it's got nothing to do with LSAT format tweaks or US news drama or the latest admissions rumor cycle. This is all about math, about demographics, and how the next decade is reshaping who actually has power in law school admissions. And once you understand this, law school doesn't just get easier to get into, it's going to get cheaper and more flexible and more negotiable than it's been in decades. There is a phenomenon happening right now called the demographic cliff, and it's simple math. Back during the financial crisis, Americans had fewer kids, and as a result, birth rates dropping affected admissions rates today because those missing kids are now supposed to be finishing high school, graduating college, and entering graduate programs, but the problem is that they don't exist. And we're not talking about a tiny dip in population. We're talking about roughly a 20% drop in birth rates. That's millions of people who were never born. And that ripple moves straight through the pipeline, which means fewer high school seniors, fewer college freshmen, fewer college graduates, and eventually fewer law school applicants. And this trend is already baked into long-term enrollment models. And it's going to start hitting law schools hard over the next several years. And so if you are applying to law school in the near future, you're entering the system right as this shift accelerates. And that gives you leverage most applicants don't even realize they have. Now, here's the key thing most people miss. Outside the very top law schools, most are tuition dependent. That means your tuition dollars are what keep the lights on. So when applications drop, schools can't just shrug and say, well, we're going to admit fewer students, because they still need to fill seats. They still need to balance budgets, and they still need revenue. And that forces a change in behavior. Admissions offices shift from gatekeepers to sales teams, and that's just basic economics. So you're going to see more fee waivers, faster decisions, bigger scholarships, and optional essays that are actually optional. You're going to see schools more willing to match offers from other schools, more automatic merit aid tied to LSAT and GPA medians, and more online and hybrid JD programs. And this is not law schools being randomly generous, it's schools competing for a smaller pool of applicants. So the good news for you is that the power dynamic is changing in your favor. So let's get specific here and talk about how the demographic cliff shows up inside admissions offices. First, the standards are going to loosen quietly. You're going to see lower LSAT cutoffs at many schools. You're going to see more flexibility around GPA dips and greater tolerance for career changes, gaps, and imperfect transcripts. And as a result, you're going to see more weight on essays, experience, and fit. Second, you're going to see increasing class sizes. And that might surprise people, but if a school used to get 3,000 applicants for 300 seats, and now they're only getting 2,000 applicants, they might not even shrink the class, they might expand it because more seats means more tuition. And you're also going to see an increase in scholarships because when demand drops, the incentives to attend have to go up. That's going to mean more merit aid, more need-based aid, more fee waivers, and more schools competing with each other for you. So you'll see more emails saying, oh, we can match that offer after all, or we've increased your award. So this will eventually be the most favorable scholarship environment we've seen in years. Now, here's another counterintuitive part. Fewer applicants doesn't mean schools are going to cut spending. They might actually spend more on new buildings or faculty hires or tech upgrades because they need to sell themselves. They need to convince you that their school is worth attending. And that is a huge shift from the old model where you as the applicant were begging for attention. Now, of course, I want to be clear, this is not going to hit every law school the same way. The very top schools like Harvard and Yale and Stanford, they're not suddenly going to drop standards. They still have big reputations, big endowments, and strong job placement, so they're going to be fine. But even there, You might see more subtle shifts, like more non-traditional applicants, more career changers, and slightly more flexibility in medians. You'll see more hybrid and innovative programs, but where the biggest changes will happen is going to be in the middle, schools ranked roughly in the 30 to 80 range. These schools are going to be under the most pressure because they need strong applicants to protect their medians, but they also need bodies in seats because they are tuition dependent. And so they're going to get more aggressive with their scholarships. They're going to get more flexible in their admissions, and you're going to have more leverage there. And so for most applicants, that's going to be the sweet spot targeting those schools in that 30 to 80 range. And so bottom line, admissions will get easier in coming years, not because standards don't matter, but because the supply and demand curve is going to shift. Schools are going to need you more than you need them. And that's going to change everything. Changes how you apply, changes how you negotiate, changes how much you should be paying. And it changes which schools suddenly become realistic options. Not about lowering your ambition, of course, but understanding how the system you're stepping into and using it intelligently. Because the coming decade in law school admissions will not look like the last one. And if you understand that early, you're in the position to benefit the most. And of course, the biggest thing you can always do to improve your negotiating power is to get the higher LSAT score, the highest score you can, to get more scholarship money, to get into better schools, to help you raise your median, to help you the school raise their median. So if you want my help getting your LSAT score up, you can book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me through the link in my bio below the video. Happy to meet with you personally, help you talk things out, help you craft your plan of attack. I see more questions coming in. Feel free to keep them coming. Ask them. I'll get to as many as I can. I see Matt is asking, is being an underrepresented minority still a boost in admissions? Well, that's a kind of a tricky question, right? Because the Supreme Court has banned race-based affirmative action, and the federal administration, the Trump administration, has been going after graduate programs based on the perception they might still be practicing it anyway. And so schools need to be able to defend their admissions offers based on the numbers. So I can't say that law schools are necessarily giving anyone a boost based solely on their race, but law schools do still love to see that you have a unique background, a unique viewpoint. If you've overcome hardship or adversity, they do still want you to be able to tell that story, and they will appreciate a diverse perspective. And so if you can share that, definitely feel free to do so, but it's not as if they're going to give you an automatic boost simply on the basis of your race. As for the question, will the next cycle be more competitive? I mean, it's anyone's guess, right? Depends on how many people apply relative to the number of law school seats. I don't see that there will be a continuing increase in the number of law school applicants. I think if anything, things will probably just flatline. But it's an open question, right? Typically, when the economy is bad, when the economy is stagnant, when the job market's not good, people tend to go to law school, tend to go to graduate school to wait out the bad economy. And so based on how the job market is, that will probably end up dictating how many people apply to law school, and that will affect the difficulty of admissions. So it's anyone's guess, we'll see what happens. I see Phaedra's asking, do we offer just admission package help? Yes, we do. We typically recommend focusing on the LSAT first, since it is the biggest and most important part of the law school admissions process. It's LSAT first, then GPA second, then everything else a distant third. And so we typically want to see, have you achieved your goal score on the LSAT officially? If not, focus on that first. If you already have, congrats. Then we switch gears and help you out with the application essays. But we do have services. We do have editors on staff with admissions experience who help you with your personal statement, adversity or diversity statement, optional essays, addenda, resume, pulling together letters of rec. We help you out with all of that. We even help you craft compelling rough drafts. Of course, we're not going to write your essays for you, but we will help you take your words and structure them into compelling narratives, then go through revision after revision after revision to make your essays as strong as possible. And so if you want to reach out for support with that, feel free. But first and foremost, we want to get you the LSAT score first. I see Natalia saying I take my February LSAT tomorrow. Good luck, Natalia. Hope you rock it. I would take it pretty easy today. In other words, don't focus on LSAT prep specifically. Don't try to cram. The LSAT is not a memorization test. It's a skills-based test. So you want to de-stress, decompress, so that you can go in tomorrow feeling confident, feeling calm, ready to crush it. So good luck on it. If you go to my YouTube channel, I have some last-minute LSAT test day advice videos covering what to do day before, day of, morning of, how to get ready, get your number 2 pencils sharpened, get your government issue photo ID ready, get your device ready if you're using it from home, taking it remotely. If you end up wanting to retake it in April or June, of course, feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to help. I see Gina Lane's asking, I want to take it in October. I took it in January, got a 149. When should I start studying? Well, it sounds like you've already started studying, right? You took it in January, got your 149. Now you want to retake it roughly 8 months from now. Plenty of time to improve significantly. I would recommend starting off now, right? If you need a break, that's totally fine, of course, but the students who get the biggest score increases, get the top scores, typically devote more time on average. And of course, you're not new to the LSAT. You already have some familiarity since you took it before, presumably. And so I would say take a slow and steady approach, little by little. Doesn't have to be 30 hours a week, of course, even just 5-10 hours a week for now, and ramp it up as it gets closer. That could be sufficient to improve significantly, but also depends on what's your goal score. You mentioned 149 now. What score do you want to hit? If you want to hit 175 plus, it becomes more important to start earlier. If you're just looking for a 160, 165, you have a bit more of a buffer and you could take some time off. But for the highest possible score, which I always recommend shooting for, give yourself more time, get yourself more support. And so think through, what are you going to do differently on your retake? Is there a resource you haven't used that you could? Is there support you could get that you have not yet gotten? What can you do to make sure that next time is going to go a lot better? And then make that retake action plan for yourself. And we could talk through it more on a call if you want to book one with me. I see Matt says, ChatGPT recommended potentially taking an LLM tax course. I'm a CPA as a non-student to offset my low GPA. Okay, well, I guess, do you want to go to law school? Because if you're focused on law school admissions here and you have a low GPA, the best way to offset the low GPA is with a relatively higher LSAT score. So that's where I would start. If you have a low GPA, the way that you improve your odds is by offsetting with a higher LSAT, because law school admissions is mostly numbers driven. It's your LSAT score, it's your GPA, and then everything else is a distant third. And so I wouldn't go around taking admissions advice from ChatGPT. The advice often is generic and they don't really know what they're saying anyway, right? It's hallucinating sometimes and saying things that might sound good and sound plausible, but have no actual evidence to back it up. I would talk to folks with admissions experience, talk to admissions officers themselves at the law school and see what they have to say. And given that law school admissions is mostly numbers driven, it's a function of your LSAT and your GPA from undergrad. The lower your undergrad GPA is, the higher you want your LSAT to be to compensate. That's the number one thing I would do first and foremost. But taking some random course, I'm not sure how that's going to help you out. Sophia says, the attorney I work for told me my LSAT score or school I go to doesn't matter. Really? You're saying that your LSAT and your LSAT score doesn't matter and the law school you go to doesn't matter? I mean, on what basis are they saying that? And I would ask you, what are your goals for your legal career? I mean, your LSAT score matters in that it can get you into better law schools and get you more scholarship money. And considering that the average cost of attendance for law school is $84,000 a year, and you could either pay sticker price for law school and pay $250,000, or you could get a full ride to law school and pay nothing. Right there, just for admissions, we have a difference of $250,000 based on your LSAT score and your GPA, of course, as being a factor, right? So your LSAT score helps you get into better law schools and helps you get more scholarship money, potentially a full ride. And then beyond that, based on the school, you could even get a living stipend on top of a full ride, meaning that you could get paid to go to law school, meaning they're giving you money rather than you giving them money. Then secondly, the law school you go to will set the trajectory for the rest of your legal career. In other words, top law firms recruit from top law schools. If you go to some no-ranked, low-ranked predatory law school that's not ABA approved, Are you going to work in big law? Are you going to work at a white shoe law firm? Are you going to get a clerkship on the Supreme Court? Probably not. In contrast, if you go to a top 14 law school, then you have a pipeline to better employment outcomes. And I'm not saying that everybody has to work in big law or work as a clerk or such, but better law schools mean better employment outcomes. Better law schools also mean better bar passage rates. For any given law school, you can look up their American Bar Association 509 reports, and you'll be able to see what percentage of their graduates were employed with a job that requires a JD within 9 months of graduation. And better law schools are able to get their students better jobs, either based on the prestige of the school or based on the support from the Career Services Office. In contrast, low-ranked law schools don't have that pipeline for recruiting, don't have the respect, don't have the reputation, don't have the prestige, and then their graduates have a harder time getting a job because the reputation and perception of the school matters. And in some cases, in many cases, it is better to go to a relatively lower-ranked law school and get more scholarship money than a higher-ranked law school with less scholarship money, but only up to a point. You probably don't want to go to the literally worst-ranked, lowest-ranked law school, even if they gave you a lot of money. You might not also want to go to a higher-ranked school and pay sticker. The answer might be somewhere in the middle. But it also depends on your goals. And a better-ranked school will have, in part, more resources, more support for helping you get past the bar. And you're also networking with a higher caliber of student. Not saying these things always matter, of course, but they often matter. And you got to consider your goals. And as some folks are saying here in the chat, maybe this particular person who gave this advice has other interests in mind, but I would talk to a variety of sources to get a more holistic picture of what the best course of action will be for you. But the answer always remains the same, that a better LSAT score will get you better admissions outcomes, get you more options upon graduating, and at the very least help you save some money on your tuition. I see Matt saying, I'm concerned that a 172 LSAT score won't be enough. Well, it depends on the schools that you're targeting, right? So the top 14 law schools, which are the highest ranked, like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, UChicago, Cornell, Columbia, NYU, their LSAT medians are going to be closer to 173, 174. And so a 172 LSAT would be a little bit below their median. Not by much, of course. But the lower your GPA is, the higher your LSAT score needs to be to compensate. Not saying you got to go to a top 14 law school, of course. You might want to go to a lower ranked school, in which case that is less important. But if your GPA is really low, you want a really high LSAT to compensate. And there are folks who retake a 172 to get a 175, and sometimes that's not necessary, other times it's a good idea. I see a question here. What do you think of binding early decision if you have only one dream school? The problem with binding early decision is that you lose any and all scholarship negotiation leverage, because you're basically saying to the school, I am willing to go to your school. I'm committing to go there regardless of the money that you offer me, regardless of the scholarships you offer me. And so then they're thinking, well, this person's already committed to us, so why should we give them anything? You're sacrificing all negotiation leverage in favor of one-itis, committing to that school at the expense of all others. Now, if scholarships matter to you not at all, they don't matter at all, then maybe you do binding early decision, but I never recommend only applying to one school. At least apply to a couple so that you have some optionality, and at least you can have some negotiation leverage, and you have multiple offers in hand. You can play them off each other to get some more money. Maybe, of course, you really want to go to one school specifically, that's your top choice, but you got to have some backups in your back pocket in almost every single case, unless you are willing to pay sticker and don't care about that sort of thing. I see the girl Mark is asking, what's the best way to start studying for the LSAT? I'm brand new to this. The first place to start is take a cold diagnostic practice test on LSAC's Law Hub platform. They give you access to 4 of those exams for free. You get the others with a Law Hub Advantage subscription. The cold diagnostic, just dipping your toes in the water, is a good benchmark, a good starting point. Of course, don't take it as being indicative of your true potential on the LSAT. It just tells you that you're new to this and you got to learn the basics, but everyone's got to start somewhere, and it gives you some motivation, some momentum, some fuel to put in the work necessary to achieve a top score or whatever your goal score is on your given time frame. And if you want to talk through what a personal plan could look like, you can reach out to me. I'm offering a free LSAT tutoring lesson to everybody watching this now or later. The link's in my bio on TikTok and IG, below the video on YouTube. Happy to talk you through what your action plan could look like to help you reach your goals on your time frame. Sophia's asking, what schools offer you the living stipend? I mean, most law schools might entertain not only giving you a full ride, but also giving you a living stipend, provided that you can apply with sufficiently high numbers. But when we're talking about getting a full ride or getting a living stipend, you're going to want to have both an LSAT score and a GPA above the medians of that school, and ideally above the 75th percentile of the schools that you're targeting. So will you get a living stipend and a full ride from a top 14 law school? Unlikely. Will you get it from a top 50 law school? Maybe, provided you can get those kinds of numbers. So you want both your LSAT score and your GPA to be above the 75th percentile. And you can see those numbers, by the way, in those American Bar Association 509 reports. And so you would search X Law School 509 ABA, and you'll see the stats for any given law school, and you'll get a sense of what kinds of numbers are necessary to achieve that outcome for admissions. Might also require some negotiation on your part, again, where it comes down to having multiple offers in hand from multiple schools. So you can go to your top choice and say, hey, I really want to go to your school in particular, but I have financial constraints. This other school offered me this number. Can you match or exceed that? I'd love to choose your school instead if I could get to a similar outcome. Then you'll see what they say. So it's going to require some back and forth on your part. They're not just going to give you their best offer right out of the gate, but you can get there with some strategic back and forth. And that is something we help our students out with, by the way. So do some homework, do some research, and come at them with really strong numbers. And the reason they give you those offers, by the way, is because you help them raise their standing in the US News ranking. So what happens is every law school reports the LSAT score and the GPA of their matriculating students, the students who are attending their schools entering 1L class. US News then pulls those stats from the ABA 509 reports for inclusion in the US News rankings. And every law school places a lot of importance on the US News rankings because those determine the prestige of the school, which helps them attract more applicants in following years and also helps them attract more donations from their alums. So you want to play this game carefully, but play it well and apply to a large range of schools so that you have more yeses, more offers, and you have more negotiation leverage to come into play there. And I don't think that you can just say the school's name in the negotiation. That might be untoward, but you want to have comparable schools in mind. And if pressed, you want to be able to say, if necessary, don't be rude about it though, but you want to look at comparable schools in comparable locations so that it's apples to apples. So one school, because also cost of living is a factor, right? So you might be able to go to a school that gives you less money if they're in a lower cost area versus a school in a big city where cost of rent and housing and insurance and transportation is going to be higher, for example. But again, we might be getting ahead of ourselves here. The first step is to have the numbers, have the GPA, have the LSAT. And so if you're a freshman in college or a sophomore in college, focus on your GPA, maintaining that, keeping it high. If you're already out of college, then we switch focus to the LSAT score. If you're a junior or senior, we can focus more on the LSAT score, getting that number up. And you want to have an upward trend in your GPA. And so if you're a freshman, your GPA is low, it's okay. You can improve it over time. If you have the upward trajectory, that's going to help you out. Even more important is having a high LSAT score, though. And so if your LSAT's below the medians, retake, get it up. You can take it in April as your first take, June as a backup, take it in June as your first take, August as a backup. Either way, you apply. The second applications open in the fall. When you apply early, it's easier to get in. There are more seats still available. More scholarship money is still available. If you're at the tail end of the cycle now, there is less money available, but you can also retake it in April for scholarship reconsideration, meaning if you've gotten in but they gave you a low number, you can retake in April, come back at them and say, now I've got a higher number, can you offer me more money? And that higher number, that higher LSAT will still help the school because that would be the new LSAT score they report to the American Bar Association, which will help them in the rankings versus the old number that you had. And I think that not enough students realize they can retake later after having already gotten an offer to get more money out of the school. And that's something I think that could help you out if you need it as well. But even better, of course, apply this fall. The second application's open. You've got 6 months till August, plenty of time to improve your odds significantly, improve your LSAT score significantly. And if you find these lives helpful, please spread the word. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. Please spread the word. Share it to your socials, in your Discords, group chats, subreddits, Facebook groups. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them, so I do appreciate your support. If you haven't already, please book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram. I'll be back Monday. I do these 5 days a week. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care. Thanks for joining.